Welcome to another episode of the Saban Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Battisto. Today's guest is my friend, former coach, Daniel McCune. McCune is coach for Sunnyvale Wrestling Club. He's a coach at Fremont High School. He's done a lot of things in the San Jose area, like Beat the Streets, also growing middle school and elementary wrestling programs. He does a lot of things from wrestling camps and media. He has basically created this website, CaliWrestling.com. Excited to have him on the show. Again, I've known this guy since maybe I was 14, 13 when I met him for the first time. So it's been a while. Really excited to have him on the show and hope you guys enjoy the conversation. What's up, man?
What is going on? You're recording already. Wow.
So here's the thing. I just start going because I feel like a lot of times that warm-up banter is actually good stuff. So if it's not, I just cut it out. If it is, I leave it in.
Yeah, as I was throwing your stuff on the Cali Wrestling website, I watched a bunch of them, and it was pretty funny how much that came up, like the recording start time. I was like, that's funny, man. It's an art to do this. You know what I mean? The podcasting thing. I think people, until you do it like you're doing, I don't think people realize how difficult it can actually be.
I mean, what I'm doing right now is just going off of Zoom and downloading it. And at first, I think you saw it had the number marks like on the actual video. I didn't know how to change that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
And I mean,
editing, there was no editing. It was just upload it.
yeah. And I mean, there's a million little logistical things like that, but then also just kind of figuring out how to make, an hour-long conversation engaging at all, or keep that conversation going without having any dead space is, yeah, I think it's harder than people like understand. You know what I mean? Like, I think I did a podcast right when I had put together the wrestling.life website. I did a podcast and I did like Mendoza and Jason Welsh. It was right after Mendoza left Cal State Bakersfield, and it was right when Jason Welsh got to San Francisco State. And it was like keeping it going was just insanely time consuming, trying to figure out new people to talk to. And I just, it ultimately fizzled out very fast just because I had so much other stuff going on and because it was a lot of work. I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to keep up with this. So as I was looking through all of your stuff, I was like, damn, this guy's been doing it. Has it been a year? It's been about a year now, right?
I think it's this November, it'll be 2 years. So,
dang, yeah.
I mean, this is episode 46. So 46 episodes in 2 years, actually, I don't think is that great.
Yeah. You sure it's not more than that?
46 episodes. Yeah. This is episode 46. I'm not a great counter, but pretty sure it's 46.
But it's labeled.
Well, so I mean, that's a whole nother thing is like trying to figure out like what can this be? Like, is this going to be something that, am I just trying to get views and likes? Is it something that I just want to just talk to people and just learn? And I think if I'm genuinely just trying to just talk to people and learn, I think it's going to be a better podcast. So I think I just got to stay true to that. I just try to turn it into something that's going to get likes or views or like just about that. Then I don't think it's going to be a good conversation or it's going to succeed.
Yeah, and it can pervert it, right? Like then it becomes something you're trying to monetize and something you're covering things that you're less interested in for, for that kind of weird ulterior motive. I guess not weird, normal, but weird to me. I do my best not to do things for money, which seems completely abnormal these days.
Except, maybe doing like track for like a wrestling tournament. You'll do that for money, right? You won't do that for free.
Well, I used to do them all for free, man. Really, the only reason I started charging was because of the amount of time I was giving up, right? Yeah. So at some point, I had to be compensated for my time because my time was becoming more valuable for various reasons, right? Kids was a huge part of that, So that really kind of kicked the need to charge in the butt, right? Like I remember originally doing like a bunch of league tournament, right? I used to do the CCAL in Santa Cruz. Actually, I used to do that CCAL, the high school one too. And that area's got nothing for money. And I used to do all of that for free, and then just over the years, like it became so cumbersome and so time consuming, and there were so many other things I wanted to do that if I was going to do it, it needed to give me something back. And then I get creative with how I use, that giving back. I actually don't take any of that income personally. Does
What
that
do you
make
mean?
sense?
Like you put it right back into like the club, or you put it back into like a website? Like, what do you
So
mean?
I run two nonprofits. I run Sunnyvale Wrestling Club, and I run a nonprofit called Principal by Design. And Principal by Design um, was the second nonprofit I had kind of started on my own for the most part. And I wrote the bylaws to really encompass pretty much anything I wanted to do. So I wrote it as like um, co-curricular activities, career technical education, teacher, continuing education, all kind of fit under the umbrella. And so I ended up starting a print shop in my teaching job. And so I run an on-campus print shop for special ed kids. And so I use Principal by Design for all the income that brings in. And then the money doesn't ever come to me. It goes out, like for the print shop, we just bought a new exposure unit to burn screens. So it's like a $2,000 piece of equipment. So like it's all for capital improvements to the shop. And then I use either one of those nonprofits, depending on where I'm at, whether I need to like pay some coaches or whether we got kids who need scholarships to Fargo. I'll take the tournament revenue and invoice it to one of those two nonprofits. So none of it, I do displace some bills like the nonprofit pays for myself, right? Stuff like that. But for the most part, I don't claim any income off any of it. I use it, to in the grand scheme of things, hopefully to help other people. But the selfish piece of that is right. It's my own little pet projects, whether it be my wrestling club or or the t-shirt shop, and then the t-shirt shop kind of expands into this bigger thing. Like Cali Wrestling is really the website itself, and wrestling.life are both um, kind of like subsidiaries of Principal by Design, right? That's the legal entity I'm using to like pay for the platform, to buy the URLs. Any income that comes in goes to that. So, yeah, I do well enough teaching that I don't want to change tax brackets. So,
I was just doing the intro, and I was thinking about like how long I've known you. I feel like you came into Harbor for maybe like our off-season club. I think I was in eighth grade. It might have been like 13. So I'm
yeah,
28 now. It's 15 years. That's a
yeah,
long
yeah.
time.
So let's see, you came into Harbor after I had already gone to Fremont. So I was the
Right.
head coach at Harbor prior to you getting into high school. But I think Brendan and Greg were your coaches.
Yeah, Brendan and Greg.
Yeah. So Brendan and I were real close friends back to when I was a kid, when I first moved to Santa Cruz, when I was like 19. And then he kind of helped me out when I coached there. And then I coached Greg's oldest boy, Eric. And so I knew those guys really well. They kind of took over after I left. And then they used to bring you guys over the hill, and I'd come back. Augie's really the glue for me over there, right? Like Phil Augustine is my stepdad, is the man. So he's the one who originally introduced me to Ed Farrell and brought me in. First, actually, he brought me in to wrestle at Soquel because he had coached at Soquel forever. Um, Actually, he brought me into SoCal when I was like 19 or 20 to wrestle this real tough 160 pounder he had. Goes by the name of Luke Rockhold. So, so that was my like first coaching thing. Not really coaching. I was really just a partner. But Phil's a little guy, right? So he'd go in and wrestle this kid that was real tough, Joey Webster, and he'd bring me in to wrestle Luke. Um, and Luke's a freak athlete, so I did all right for a little while. But by the end of that year, he was it was hurting me. I was like, this kid's going to be real tough. And I think they both made state that year and did well. And then I think the following year, Augie kind of moved over to Ed's place to Harbor, and Ed asked me to be the head coach. And that was like '06. And that was Davis Wright and um, uh, Tyler Naiman,
Mm-hmm.
Eric Lopez. Like there was a real good group of guys there. Um, uh, Rosenberg, King. They had a good team. That was back when Watsonville was still in the league.
Yeah,
So
I've heard about some of those dual meets,
yeah,
where I think they lost for some reason. Like somebody was up by a point and got like last second takedown, or like got reversed or something stupid. And there's a story of Ed Farrell taking his hat off. No, slams it on the mat, picks it up again, slams it
slams it
back
again.
down.
Yeah, it was fun times. I think they ended up winning the league that year, but they weren't used to anyone giving them a good go, and we had a good team that year and gave them a good go, and it was close. It was down to like the final match, and that was back when they did the whole thing on like the league finals on public access. It was
Yeah.
like a one map final, and Lovell would come out and like intro it, and I was always like, dude, I really dislike the like suit and tie thing, right? Like it's just not who I am.
Well,
And
you're not bashing like just suit and tie wearing. You're just saying for yourself. It's
yeah,
not for
no,
your team.
it
Got it.
well, anything that feels disingenuous bothers me. And I think there is people that can pull it off, right? But then I think there's people who can't pull it off. And I don't want to, get too much into who's who with that. But for
Okay.
myself,
Yeah.
for myself, I can't pull it off. So I never did it. I always was kind of dressed down. Um, it works well at Fremont with Deuce and I, because Deuce is the same, right? He's not into that at all. So it works for our team here, with Deuce and Ernesto and these guys. But um, my first year coaching in that league finals, I was in like flip flops, Dickie shorts, and like
There
a
you go.
baseball cap. And Lovell must have made like 10 jokes during the like during the broadcast. It was so funny. Pat was such a funny guy. Um, and so I remember watching it later because I wanted to see how our kids actually looked. Because I hadn't, I was so young, I hadn't like even got into watching film or doing any of the stuff we do now, right? And um, I just remember not like watching that much wrestling because I was just busting up off Pat giving me shit about the way I was dressed. It was so funny. So yeah, but I'm still the same today. I mean, that was probably over 20 years ago now, right? So,
Yeah.
because
I'm
because
getting old.
yeah,
You
and I've
definitely
got
looked a lot older than when I first met you.
yeah,
I,
man, it's
I
wild.
was thinking this, when you're talking about, what you do with the nonprofits. Uh, Sometimes it's hard for me, and I feel very guilty like doing anything like just for me. And I do you feel like that at all? Like when you talk about the phone bill, you said it like, oh, like I'm kind of stoked I'm doing it, but like also like even that little bit, just having a little bit for yourself. It just seems like it's kind of hard for you to do that. And I'm not saying it to fluff, your ego at all, which even that right there kind of adds to it. But you know what I mean? You get what I'm saying here?
Oh yeah, um I'm in my classroom right now. The kids' practice just ended. So right now, both my kids are wrestling. So my ex-wife was in here with the kids. They've taken off. And one of kind of the side notes to actually charging a little for my time and creating that value was that problem. I basically burned through a marriage because of that. Because if I wasn't doing it for someone else, it felt selfish, right? Like I felt like I had no business kind of getting to where I got, and I owed so many people for helping me along the way that I just wanted to give back. And there was a lot of stuff that kind of went around that, but I threw myself into that so hardcore at one point that it probably cost me a marriage. I mean, there's obviously lots of factors that go into getting divorced. But when you're doing what it takes to like run a wrestling program and to run a successful wrestling program, like especially in the beginnings, if you don't have a big crew of guys, like it's a lot of work, man. And you can do, as you know, and as most people know who probably watch this thing, you can do your teaching job if you're a teacher and then put in a full another job of 40 hours a week, easy coaching wrestling. Um, I mean, I was counting it up the other day because they're about to tear down the Quonset hut. They're tearing down the Quonset hut in June. So I was counting up like how many hours of programming we do in that a week right now. And it's like, well over 20. And I'm like, dude, we all teach full time, or Deuce and I at least, and Ernesto's on campus as well. So we're all here full time. Then we do another, at least 20 hours of programming a week in the room. Like, it doesn't leave a lot of time for other stuff. And I think over the years, I've learned not to judge coaches so much on doing it a little bit for themselves. When I was young and when I first got back to Fremont, I used to get real mad because it seemed like a lot of coaches were coaching for them, right? And I thought that was so wrong. But over the years, I've kind of come to terms with that a little bit. I still don't think it's great, but I can understand why, because it's really, really hard to do this, coaching wrestling and coaching anything for that matter, working for kids in any kind of programming, fashion where you're not charging $1 million for what you're doing. It really needs to be selfless, and that selfless can, dude, it can eat you up, right? So
Yeah.
yes, I still feel bad. I feel bad anytime it's about me, and like taking that money for my cell phone. I always put that out there because I don't want to. I don't want people to think like I do, like I don't do anything for myself. You know what I mean? Like, um, I displace my bills a little bit, and that's the main one that's consistent. Occasionally, I'm able to squeeze in some other stuff here and there, but like, you know, like what else do I do? I'll like
Well, you
collect the
don't need to
points.
unveil all your secrets.
Dude, I got lots of secrets. Let's unveil them. It's, so like when I book our trips and stuff, you get points on the website. Sometimes I'll take those
Do you use
points.
do you use a credit card with travel benefits?
No, you know
And
why I
then do you get
don't do that?
reimbursed?
No, no, no,
You don't know
no.
that one? Okay.
Well, so the problem, so we did the credit card thing for a little while, and we ended up building debt with the club. And getting out of debt, as most people know in this country, is not an easy thing.
Yeah.
So right now, I think we still do have a card that's open, but it's got a zero balance, and we don't ever use it. Like we don't have the tangible card. Like it took us a while to get Square again because, dude, I put Fargo on a credit card once for a kid. Like, it's
That's a
like
lot.
you can't. Yeah, we over the Deuce is as crazy as I am, and we've done some things like that for years, and we're back to a place now where we're everything's very clean, so that's nice. But there was years where like we didn't have any money, and we had a bunch of kids who'd done some incredible stuff, and they didn't have any money, and we'd figure out what we needed to do to make them earn it, but make sure they didn't get denied the opportunity, right? And a couple of those
Yeah.
years was kids raised $400 or $500 for Fargo. That's not what Fargo costs, So we covered the balance with credit cards. So not the smartest thing to do, even if you're getting points.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was so I think if you're doing it like in a small amount, I mean, I don't think it's that big of a deal, but there was a principal. So what he was doing was and I think it was maybe for an elementary school in the Kern County. And what he was doing is he was using his personal credit card to buy stuff for the school that they needed. And then what he was doing is that he was getting reimbursed, and then he was getting the points for his credit card, like the travel points for his credit card. But
Yeah.
what ended up happening is he was buying a bunch of stuff that the school didn't even really need but because he was in an executive position, he was able to push to get things approved. So he was like, it was like, I don't, it was some crazy amount. I'm not going to look it up, but I remember. So I have a buddy who was there, and he was part of the, he wasn't involved in the scandal, but he was attending school at the time that was going on. And it became like this huge scandal because it was a lot. Like it wasn't like a little bit of amount. It was this huge amount.
Yeah, we've always been very like conscientious about that. Like even when we did that credit card stuff, we took credit cards out in the name of our nonprofit. So that debt belonged to the nonprofit, but it ended up weighing things down, right? Like
Yeah.
the goal is always to provide opportunities going forward. And when you start doing things irresponsibly with money that's going to, have to be paid back in the future, what you end up doing is eliminating, the opportunities for the kids of the future. And where we didn't exactly do that, it put us in positions where we're like, okay, shit, how are we going to raise this much money? Now we got to raise the credit card bill and the next year's kid going to Fargo, right? Like, so it was a band-aid, and we got through it. But I'd love to say we got through it without me running some tournaments for money that went into that. You know what I mean? Like being able to produce revenue through wrestling, I used to think was like a huge negative thing, like was made you a sellout. And over the years, I'm like, dude, we've got to do it to some extent. Like everybody has to find their own moral compass with it. Like for me, it's uncomfortable as all hell, but I do it, and then I do my best to make sure that that money's going back to someone who needs it more than I do, right? So um, that's how I sleep at night. But if you don't have those sleeping issues, more power to you, man. Like I've kind of gotten too old to judge people over it. So
Yeah, that's something I'm still dealing with, is trying to let go of, things I can't control and trying to figure out where exactly my moral compass lies, being consistent with that. Like, especially when it comes to like winning. It's like, dude, I am so competitive and I freaking hate it. And like, I don't think anybody really understands, except maybe for like a couple people, like how like serious I take things. I don't know, maybe more people think I take things super serious, but trying to figure out, it's like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this just because I want to help kids succeed and figure things out and, challenge them? Am I doing this because there's something that I just got to prove to some extent? And I think that's common with a lot of young coaches, is especially maybe they didn't have, there's a lot of wrestlers that didn't, end on a good note, end their careers on a good note, and maybe got something they got to prove. And, I'm still maybe in that phase where I'm trying to figure that out. Because I don't know. I tell you what, like, I think if I was definitely in the other camp, like not as competitive, I'd probably be maybe a lot happier. Like I wouldn't be so focused on all these other things that really I don't really have that much control over.
yeah, the hard thing about the focus on what you can control thing is it's not tangible, right? It's not you can control a hell of a lot more than what people like tell you. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's funny because you kind of control how much you can control too, right? With
Yeah.
like your work ethic and the positions you put yourself in. And like I remember we were in a place where we wanted to improve college access to kids. So like one of the reasons I started setting up the camps we run at Fremont was because I wanted to be able to better control our kids getting recruited, right? So one of the ways I'd pick who I was going to reach out to be clinicians was I'd look at the academic profile of our athletes, their competition background, what level they should be at, what schools, like, what's their top 3 schools, what they want to study, what's the best fit. And I'd reach out to that coach and go, hey, we're running a camp this summer. We'd really like you to come out and be a clinician. And I'd develop a personal relationship with them. All of a sudden, our kids are going to college to wrestle. And I'm like, dude, like, lots and lots of people would have been like, oh, you have no control over that. right? I'm like, I figured
Yeah.
out a way to do. I'm not saying I controlled it, but I sure as hell made an impact on, things that a lot of people would have deemed not my job and not something I could impact. So
Well, so I think to your point, right? It's like you're not going to make it, well, because that coach is now a clinician, that means your kid's going to go to that school. You can't control that, but you can increase the probability. You know what I mean? It's like
exactly.
I can't control what our kids are eating at home, right? And why they come in so heavy for practice on Monday. But I can do my due diligence and try to give as much information to parents as possible. I can make sure they have access to, if they can afford it, a nutritionist. We can do like mental Mondays where we give guys information, so where they can be, oh, hey, we've given you the information. It's on you to be accountable. We can check all of our boxes that way, and maybe increases the probability that they're going to do the right things and not come in heavy on Monday. Like all of those things I think about, and this is where, I have to kind of check myself. There are so many things that my mind, I feel like, is just, I'm always thinking about those things. And like, I have like a long list of stuff that I don't know, it just hit me during my prep period. And I just spent an hour just typing it out, all the things that I think I can control and what we already do. And then what it takes for us to jump levels to an elite program, and stuff like the nutrition, stuff like feeder programs with clubs and trying to get middle school and elementary wrestling, stuff with our strength and conditioning stuff, like all of it, fundraising, all of it. And I think about, how do we execute it then? And what's our path from where we're at? And I think about like this, there's only one of me. And if I want to change something, I have to get other people on board with the vision, because what's going to end up happening if I don't, then and I don't see it get done, either I'm going to do it myself or I'm just going to be really frustrated and probably, unhappy. And if I do it myself, there's costs for other things. Like I'm not going to have as much time to spend on the podcast, not going to spend as much time with my fiance. We're not going to be able to, do all those other things. So it's just trying to figure that stuff out, and trying not to lose my head.
Well, and when you start going down that road too, figuring out how to be more efficient plays a huge role in it, right? Like I remember, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, I started looking at how much time I was spending doing like logistical things that mattered and were important, and made the pieces of the puzzle I have it on my program, right, with the coaches I have, you know, um, it figuring out how to make them just get to focus on wrestling, right? Like, I'm lucky right now with what we have at Fremont. I mean, I've always been lucky with Deuce, right? Like, I've never had to worry about the technical aspects of the sport, right? I always want to learn. That's why I love wrestling. I was always like wanted to learn the new move or the new thing or get better and advance my knowledge of the technical aspects. And then when I got back to Fremont and Deuce was here, I was like, oh, dude, like this guy's forgotten more wrestling than I'll ever know. Like I don't have to search it out anymore. And I've been very lucky in that regard. Like I was, ended up at Davis with Munoz and Sanchez and Zaleski and those guys. And I was the administrator for a year there, and then went down and started working Munoz's camps, and then ended up back at Harbor. I think I was at Harbor '06 and then '08, '09. And that was right before you got there, right? And
Yeah.
then that year at Harbor, I realized very quickly, right after coming back from Davis, like I don't know enough wrestling. Like I could get a kid to state, but putting kids on the podium was going to be really hard for me. Because you were talking about like people having unfinished competition careers, dude. I don't have a competition career. Uh, I was a varsity high school wrestler, right? Like I have no business, like
Yeah.
you know,
Well, there's
when I,
always a
when I
bell curve. You know what I mean? There's always a bell curve.
yeah, yeah, but I mean, I I I wore that, right? Like I
Yeah.
went back to Harbor and I had some kids that were good, and I got a couple of them to state, and it hit me. I looked around state and I listened to everybody else, and I was like, dude, these guys just know more than me. And Bobby Soto, right? I had Bobby and those guys from Fremont when my senior year, Bobby took over and he came up from Cal State, right? And he knows his stuff. So I knew what good coaching was and I knew what good technique was, but I also knew that the gap between me being able to apply it on a daily basis, um, And where I was I had to fill that gap, right? And that challenge was great for me. That was the competitive part of me, was like, can I catch these guys who were D1 guys for 5 years, right? How am I going to bring something different to the table, knowledge wise, without having that experience? And, ultimately, like, I became the piece to the puzzle rather than the focal point. So I've always kind of been like a secondary piece. So that secondary piece just grew and grew and grew. All right, no, how are we going to fund the pro? Like you mentioned, some of these things. How are we going to fund the program? How are we going to be more efficient with the way we're teaching? How are we going to not burn them out? How can we get an extra workout in without breaking down their bodies? Like who's got knowledge we want to learn from? Are we going to bring that person in? Like, how's the system function? Lots of coaches don't even understand how the system functions, right? Like, running tournaments is great because I have coaches come up and ask me questions, and I'm like, dude, you don't know shit. Like, it's crazy. Like, it's crazy some of the stuff they ask me. Dude, the greatest thing happened this year. I was running mid-cows, and I was sitting there with the mom that helps me out. Her name's Dana. She's great. And Tuttle, Oklahoma was out. And this kid from Tuttle, it's Friday night or whatever, going from day one to day two. And the check scale's right next to the head table. So he's checking his weight, right? Little teeny kid, 106, 113. So he's checking his weight. And I must have got 5 or 6, coaches and parents coming up one after another asking questions. And I didn't even think about it, right? I'm just answering, trying to be nice, not to, because you can be a big dick running tournaments, and I am sometimes, but I try my best to be as nice as possible because it's a bad look for parents. It's really easy for parents to let their kids quit this sport. So I
Yeah.
try my best not to give them a reason. So I answer all these questions, Dana and I, right? And this kid turns and he goes, man. And he's got a real like heavy Oklahoma drawl too, which made it even better because he's this little like Mighty Mouse looking kid. He goes, man, is your guys' job just to answer stupid questions all day? And I was busting up. I was just laughing so hard. I was like, yeah, kind of, kid, kind of, because
God.
those guys. It was. And he said it loud enough that like the last person probably heard him as he's walking away, and I'm like, it was just so funny. And I was like, yeah, kind of, kid. Someone's got to teach people like what's going on. But it blows my mind how many coaches don't like take the time to understand how systems function, because those systems impact the kids and impact their opportunities and their development and their ability to go to the next level, right? Like whether it be how to qualify for Fargo or whatever it is. Like there's a million systems that all interact, especially the high school season. Jesus Christ, printing out weigh-in sheets is insane. The complicated nature of that's insane. And there's guys who ask me, November 30th how to do it, and then the same guys ask me at league finals. And I'm like, come on, bro. If you're modeling behavior to kids and learning and wanting them to grow and develop, you need to do it too. Whether it be wrestling or learning how to operate a stupid computer system that makes zero freaking sense.
Yeah.
So
I
I
mean,
think
I
that
think,
modeling behavior piece is sometimes forgotten.
well, I mean, I just don't see a world. I don't see a functional room if you're not trying to be the model for success for your program. Because you like even let's not even use those words. Like if you're an adult around kids, you should be a model. Like you should be like, and not I'm not perfect. Like I'm not saying I'm perfect. For a fact I'm not perfect. Um, I, I
I've
don't
known
want to
you a
talk. I
long
don't. Let's
time.
not talk about that story. But I think just always trying to be like behaviorally like the person that you would want your kids to be. You know what I mean? Like try to be that person. Just try, especially when you're around other kids. I don't
Yeah,
understand.
well,
Like why is that a complicated thing? It shouldn't
I
be.
think it's the way we're defining success a lot of the time, right? And this was the hardest thing for me. It actually goes back to what you were talking about the competitive nature of a lot of us, right? Like, um, it's easy to quantify medals and championships and state placers and state qualifiers and things like that. It's much more difficult to quantify the like severely autistic kid that wrestled for you for 4 years that that made the varsity team, right? Like his senior year, or like the kid who came in as a 230-pound freshman that wrestled 145s his senior year because he was just morbidly obese, right? Like, or the kid who came from a completely broken home with zero money and no insurance, who built the confidence enough to go to community college after being the first person to graduate high school from his family, right? Like, I think success is such a tricky word and so individualized that when you're looking at your program and trying to figure out what you're doing right and wrong, it's very, very easy to lose track of the interpersonal impact we're having on everybody who comes through the room, right? And the last at least 5 years, but much longer than that, I've been very lucky to be around people who will have those conversations. Lots of people won't even have them. They're just like, that's a waste of time, right? And I've been probably at Fremont for 15 years because of Deuce's willingness to have those conversations with me. And he's older than I am, obviously, and been around and is more than willing to tell me, shut up. But for the most part, the guy will engage in those conversations and be a great sounding board and partner in trying to figure out those goals for our program, right? Like, I think all of us deal with things that we don't want to, in terms of like, what's the easiest like elephant in the room ones, right? Like recruiting, holdbacks,
Yeah.
all of these things that happen for the competitive advantage of programs and individuals. And it's like, if you're willing to do those things, does it impact your success? And if you're just looking at championships and medals and things like that, for sure, you have to be willing to do those things to level the playing field, to be competitive with the best programs in the state. And when I say that, I used to say that with a lot of judgment. And, now I've been around long enough to realize that some of these programs don't even promote those things.
Yeah.
Like, the parents talk to the parents and they create social networks of kind of elitism almost. And it blows my mind. So it's like, it just kind of is what it is. It's legal, right? First of all, and at least with the holdback thing. And with the recruiting thing, it's not ever enforced any of the kind of rules around it unless someone's has to like fib. You know what I mean? Tattletale, not lie, but someone has to report it. So it's like those things are just part of our sport. So if you're so concerned with that very narrow definition of success of like state championships, man, you better learn how to sell wrestling and sell your program and sell your area and, sell to parents what you're doing. And you know what, man? I didn't get into teaching and youth development to be a salesman. If I wanted to sell shit, I'm born and raised in the Silicon Valley. I'd be making a bunch of money selling semiconductor shit or software or fucking ad space on Facebook, right? Like, I didn't become a teacher to sell. So like, when we started looking at those things and figuring out again, like systems, how this system functioned, we really had to redefine success and what we thought it was for us in our program. And it wasn't always about winning titles. It was about having the most positive impact we could on kids. And, we screw it up sometimes, but hopefully we, get it right more than we screw it up. And I don't think state titles is a good reflection of that. So,
Well, it's interesting. You're talking about like how you define like success and stuff. And I watched this thing with Nick Saban, and it was right after he retired. And I think he's sitting next to Ted Cruz, so he's got to be maybe some congressional hearing. And I think they're talking about NCAA stuff and how just with NIL and just the transfer portal, how things have changed. And as someone that was so successful Division I college football, both at Michigan State and at Alabama, and he spent some time in the NFL before in between those years. But he would do these things where he'd have recruit like the families for recruits. He'd have them over at his house with his wife, and they would go down in the basement, and it's all decked out in all Alabama stuff, and they drink and they line dance, and then they would be serious and talking about like, why would it be good for your kids to come to Alabama, and like the kind of values we're going to instill with them, and how we're going to discipline and being accountable and all these things, right? And that's what he's saying, like, who actually knows, right? But it's so what he does is he kind of goes off and he kind of deals with the recruits while his wife deals with the parents. And this is after one night of doing that. And this is, I think, right before Saban's retiring. And his wife is like, we got to stop doing this. And he's like, what do you mean? And he's like, we're talking about all these things that we're going to do for these kids. I just spent, however much time talking to these parents about how much money we're going to give them to go to Alabama. It's like, that's not why we're doing this. You know what I mean? And it's Alabama. Like, they're one of the most winningest programs, in college history.
Yeah. I mean, NIL is ruining college sports. I mean,
Yeah.
Football is complicated because of the amount of revenue it brings in for the colleges, right? But specifically with wrestling, I don't think the NCAA would have guessed at all that wrestling would be as big of an NIL player as it is, like as a sport.
Yeah. Well, if you look at what's happening, right? It's like it's kind of perverted, I feel like, amateur wrestling to where it's not. And there's maybe some other things that come into play here. I actually think Division II, Division III, and JUCO play a larger role in maybe not getting the quote unquote best kids or the highest level kids, but developing that character element that we talk about. And it even puts a bigger part on high school coaches. It's like to develop that character element, because if you're in the Division I level, I mean, at some point, if you're at, a mid-level school or a low-level school and you find success, I mean, expect a big program to come knocking and say, basically, transfer and we'll give you some cash.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's unfortunate, right? Like, I'm trying to think of, how to say it without using the names, because some of the stuff, like, I don't want, it's hard to talk about it and not use examples that could be deemed insulting, right? Like, you watch these transfers and you wonder, like, is that the character we're trying to develop in the sport, right? When you get good, you immediately take off to the blue chip place. Like, oh, here's a good way of phrasing it. Curry, right? The basketball player, the Warriors little shooter. Curry went to Davidson, right? Because no one recruited him. He wanted to go to Duke. Duke or North Carolina, whatever. I could be mixing it up. I'm a wrestling coach. What do I know about basketball? But I read an article about, I forget if it was Duke or North Carolina, but one of those two big basketball schools was like his dream school. He wanted to go there. They wouldn't give him a look, right? He goes to Davidson, gets him into the NCAA tournament, has a great year. Those guys come calling. Curry, and this is prior to NIL, obviously. So they're not calling with a bunch of money, but now they're going to give him a scholarship that he wanted when he was coming out of high school. And he turns him down. He turns him down basically and says, look, man, if you didn't believe in me then, why do you believe in me now? Right. So I think what we're seeing with NIL is now money is playing money is eliminating that loyalty. Right. And we're becoming a society that loyalty is not only not valued, it's financially unintelligent, right? Like, you're going to leave money on the table if you're loyal. And that's not just NIL, right? Like, I talk about living in the Silicon Valley. Constantly, they talk about if you're not changing jobs every 2 years, you're making on average like 25% less than your peers. Like that seems unbelievably horrible, right? And that's because they're negotiating better salaries for people coming in. It's almost like you ever have you ever been on a cell phone plan for like 6 years straight? And then you look at the bill and you're like, oh, if I switch, I have this introductory offer over here. Then you look at all the introductory offers and you realize the plan you're on, if you switched and came back, they'd give it to you for half the price.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like that's what that our whole society feels like that now, right? Like loyalty is not an admirable trait in any practical sense anymore. It's just something old guys talk about. And that's appalling, right? Like, it's appalling that there's not more actionable items that are tangible that we see in our society that value loyalty. Like the only thing I can think of kind of left in our society that values loyalty is like my partner, like my girl. Like, there's loyalty there and it's
Yeah.
and it's valued and reciprocated, right? But anything having to do with money, it feels like disloyalty gets you more money. And NIL seems just like that, right? And there's plenty of examples from this last year of guys, transferring when there was colleges who gave them legitimate shots at being a D1 athlete, believed in them, and then they succeeded and they immediately jumped ship, or maybe not immediately, but they jumped ship. And it from, the maybe the rumor mill a little bit, but it all sounded like it was based on a payday. And you can't really blame people. You don't know what financial situation, they're coming from. Money is not, it's not dollar for dollar. You know what I mean? A dollar to Bill Gates is going to be different than a dollar to me or to you. And a dollar to me is going to be different than a dollar for, a kid I had to give wrestling shoes in my wrestling room, right? Like the value of money is individualized based on your access to it. So like, it's really hard for me to sit here and be like, man, that kid's a disloyal jerk because I don't know what that money changed in his life. Does that make sense? Um,
Yeah.
but I know that some of these kids are transferring for paydays that in my mind shouldn't be worth devaluing their loyalty and their trust in their coaches who gave them a shot, who saw something in them as an underperforming high school kid. And, with some of these D1 kids, underperforming means they took third in state instead of first. So, like, me and you both know that's not not
I
necessarily
mean, it's always a bell
underperforming.
curve. It's always a bell curve. You know what I
Well,
mean?
yeah, for sure. But it's always transferring away from someone who believed in you and gave you a shot, right? Dude, so when I got to Fremont, they talked all about D1 or bust. When I got here,
Yeah.
we are the first kid I hoped to get recruited went D1, and I used to get him summer jobs. And he ended up I got him a nice summer job. He didn't go back. He's like, I'm done with all of that. And it pissed me off. I'm like, dude, look, we were doing this to give you the opportunity of an education. So I started talking more about education than I did about college wrestling. And then I started giving the coaching staff that we were working with at the time, shit about why are we D1 or bust? That makes zero sense to me. And the only argument that people had was, well, D1's the best. I said, yeah, but what are we doing? Right? Are we trying to create the best? And they're like, yes. I'm like, but the best what? Right? And I'm like, dude, if I would have just taken the opportunities I had to go to college, I would have graduated 4 or 5 years earlier
Yeah.
if I would have, went to some school that I wouldn't have burned out in or had the confidence in taking advantage of the opportunity. Right. And so this year we have a D3 qualifier, a D2 qualifier, a JUCO national qualifier, a JUCO national place winner, like all out of our program, right? We're hitting all levels and we're fitting kids to the best academic opportunities that they have.
Yeah. And that's what's, I think, missing. And I think I don't want to say this. Maybe it's just the kind of mentality that maybe some coaches have, and they kind of put it on the kids, or maybe it's something that the kids hear and see and like, well, I'm going to be D1. I was a D1 or bust kid. which if you looked at how I wrestled, yeah, maybe, the intensity and the toughness, maybe that's there. The skill was definitely not, in my opinion. I felt so far behind when I got into a college, a Division I college room. I was probably, maybe a Division II or even a Division III guy. And I wish maybe I didn't quite have that mentality, and I wish I was a little more open. My senior year, I almost went to a couple different Division II schools, but actually made academically and more financially sense for me to actually go to Cal State Bakersfield than go to, those Division II schools that are in the Midwest. But I think for a lot of kids, it's like you have to think about what is the best fit for you. And then maybe it's academically. And again, looking at some of these Division I schools, you go to a big school, academically, it might not make sense for you to be there because you're in a larger class setting, right? You're not getting as much attention. I think, again, it's like you have to think about what is best for you. Like, is it a big school or is it a small school? Is it Division I? Do you like wrestling that much, or you want to go for another reason? I mean, you have to figure those things out, and it's hard when you're 18 to do that.
Well, let's talk about your story. I mean, if anybody knows it, it's me, right? What was that school you verbaled to before we called Mendoza? It was
Southwest Minnesota State University.
yeah, yeah. The tunnels and the snow and whatnot, right?
Well,
I've been.
I was born in Illinois. Like, I know the
Oh
cold.
yeah.
Like, I know the.
No. We no. We. I remember you're part of like, I talk about this stuff now like an old wise wizard, right? But all that is that I've just been doing it a while, and you're a great you're a part of that journey for me, right? Like we knew that. You just described yourself to a T. It's remarkable. You know yourself that well. You didn't know shit. Like the way you shot a high crotch, your feet were all messed up,
Dude,
but you were tough. You were tougher than any kid I'd ever met. You broke your hand and pinned through the tournament. I'm like, what the hell? This kid's crazy. And then, yeah, you're actually the last kid I wrestled in the room and lost my shit with. You pissed me off so bad one time. I was like,
what
and
the hell
then
are you talking about?
I was so mad I threw myself to my back or something dumb because I wrestled really bad when I'm mad. But I remember you doing something. I forget what you did, but I remember you doing something. I got mad and I like threw myself to my back for some reason because I was a moron and I was still young. And I got up and I thought about it after, and I'm like, and I talked to you because you were like, "What the hell?" You couldn't really figure out why I was mad, and it occurred to me, you just didn't know how to wrestle yet. Like I thought you were a lot better wrestler than you were, and then it occurred to me, oh my God, this kid is just that tough. Like you were next level tough. And that's how the conversation actually it was, I think it might have been in this classroom. You told me you were verbaling, and Bobby Soto, I think, was in my room, and I had just done that podcast with Mendoza. No, it was before that. Mendoza used to hit me up and ask me about Bay Area kids. And he got connected to me through Bobby. And um, Bobby was talking about, and this is prior to NIL, right? So Bobby was talking about Bakersfield kind of losing its way a little bit, and he said, and for him, that was the old Bakersfield was they just recruited tough kids,
Yeah.
right? That's what they did, and they made them into wrestlers, and they were just grittier than everybody else. That like '96 team that took 3rd,
Mm-hmm.
and mind you, some of those guys were phenomenal wrestlers, right?
Oh
But
yeah.
they were all just tough too. And he was talking about, you know, Bakersfield needing to get back to that, and he basically was saying, where were those tough kids? And I had just kind of been in the room with you. You had come over from Santa Cruz and done, it must have been a freestyle practice because I don't think you had ever wrestled freestyle. And I didn't realize that. And I was like, oh my God, this kid's never wrestled free. You might have already won a CCS tournament by then. It might have been your junior year. And is that, when did you verbal to
It
the
was
South
um it
Minnesota
was
State?
uh it was like right after spring break my senior year. So I went on my
Maybe
different trips during spring break, and then it was around that time because I had already verbaled, and I think I thought you were talking to Mendoza at like Virginia Nationals or something like that, like senior
Nah,
nationals.
I called him. I
You called
called
him?
him. I didn't even
Okay.
I didn't even go. I didn't even go that year. So I was talking to Bobby, and Bobby was kind of venting. I'm all, I know exactly the kid you're talking about. It's Brian Batista. This kid's exactly who you're talking about. He's tough as shit. He's rough around the edges. He needs to learn how to wrestle. But you're never going to find a tougher kid than this guy. And I'm all, if they're going to, turn any tough kid into a wrestler, this is their guy. And and Bobby's like, dude, call Mendoza. Tell Mendoza to recruit him. And I can't remember if Bobby called first and told him to talk to me, or if I called him directly. But we made that phone call, and then we told you, because I think you had just told me you verbal, and then
Yeah.
maybe I texted you and was like, hey, would you be interested in this, or because I wasn't sure you would back out of a verbal. But
Well,
I think
so what, I don't know if you remember this part. So this is kind of where it's like kind of weird, like coincidences. You had texted me like expect a call, and I kind of like rolled my eyes like, all right, like if I get a call, whatever. But so
that's
what
right.
happened was they gave me my NLI to sign, and 40 had already gone. So Evan 40 is who recruited me, and he went to Minot State. And I still keep he's still a really good coach. And I didn't really know Nelson that well. So I'm like interacting with Nelson, and I get my financial aid. And that was big for me because like if I can't afford, like with the loans and the work study and the scholarships, I can't afford to go to school. So I look at this gap, and initially it was going to be 2,000 out of pocket. And it's like 3,000. I'm like, dude, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, because especially flying back and forth and all that stuff. So I look at it, and I look at him like it's jacked up, and I only had a week to sign. So I remember letting Nelson know, like, it's jacked up. Like, I can't sign this. And they were like, they're going to look at it, and then they were going to extend it a week. So the day it was messed up, I was in the computer lab studying or something during like my free period. And I get a call from Mendoza, and he's asking me if I would want to come down on an unofficial visit to check out the school. And I was like, crap, what do I do? So I remember I talked to like one of my teachers. I talked to my mom. I talked to like a couple other people, and they're like, dude, go down. why wouldn't you go down? Go down, check it out. Financially, it made way more sense to go to Cal State Bakersfield because of my grades, and I wasn't getting an athletic scholarship, but with the loans and the grants and stuff, like I wouldn't have needed really to pay anything.
Yeah, I do remember that, because that was still, by that time, that was one of the big questions I asked was, where are you financially? What do you want to study? Where are you financially? What kind of program are you looking for? Normally dealing with California kids, I would ask about weather, but I knew you had come out from Illinois, and all that stuff. So yeah, geography, things like that, rural, like kids from the city, man, going out to a podunk, like
Yeah.
2,000 person town is rough. So yeah, I remember having that conversation about financial stuff. And I knew just from my own experience that Bakersfield was like one of the cheapest state schools and like really can work with you financially. Um, Bobby tried to get me to go. Actually, Kerr, I was down there my senior year, and Kerr said at that time there was prop, whatever. Like I wasn't even college eligible. I was a horrible student. And uh, and Kerr was like, I had dislocated my finger at the Bakersfield competition camp. Only camp I ever got to go to was I was on scholarship, and I dislocated my finger in one of the matches. And Kerr happened to be watching, and they popped it back into place. And I finished that match and won, and then won my next match. And he liked that gritty kind of, he liked that because I didn't think twice, right? I popped it back into place and went, and it was one of the things I could do because I didn't care, right? Like I was doing it because it was fun. I didn't really work very hard, right? I just liked the technique of it, and the injury pain didn't really bother me. So Kerr offered to get me in on like a prop. I forget what it was called, but after being around Bakersfield a little bit, coming out of the Bay Area, I was like, no, man, I ain't gonna spend the next 5 years of my life here, right? Like, no disrespect to Bakersfield
It's
now,
not that
but it's like,
bad. It's not that bad.
dude,
If you're on the
it
east
ain't.
side, it's a little bit different. You go to the west side though, it's like I like the west side Bakersfield. It's not
Dude,
bad.
I grew up 45 minutes from San Francisco and 45 minutes from Oakland, and went up there a lot in high school. And then when I didn't go to Bakersfield and I needed to leave the Bay Area, I moved to San Diego. Right. So like
San
I
Diego's
was
cool.
Yeah, I wanted to be coastal, and I didn't believe I could graduate from college, so I didn't think of it as an opportunity, right? So by the time I was working with kids like you, like it was it was nice. All those little things played into it. All those little kind of shitty experiences, all those things that I screwed up, like I've been able to pass on to kids. Like, hey, don't do that. Look, I know you shouldn't do that because I did it. Like, and it didn't work out. Like, that's
Yeah.
not what you want to do. It's kind of like why I'm good at running tournaments, man. I'm good at running tournaments because I've already made all the mistakes you can make running them, right? And I get good reps, And with the college stuff, like you were one of the reps for me. Like I was figuring out how to get it done and how to work with kids and their parents. And I think I talked to your mom at one point too during all of that.
I think so. And I also think you were trying to convince me to do the association duels, and I had prom that weekend. And I was
That's
like,
right.
I already paid for the tux. Like, I already paid for all that stuff. I kind of have to go. But in my head, I was like, man, maybe there's a way I could get out of this, or maybe I could like somehow do both. But there are
Yeah.
times where you just kind of have to go do those other things, especially if you're already locked in.
Yeah, and yeah, I think I was probably more aggressive back then. I probably gave you shit about that at that time,
You're like,
right?
oh, well, because I told you. So she was my high school girlfriend was a senior, so I went to her prom, and then when I was a senior, she was going to come back to my prom. So you're like, I think it was well, you already went to prom the year before. Like, why do you need to go again? Which like I get your
Yeah,
logic, and I'm 18. I'm thinking, you know what, he's right. I don't need to go to prom again, but I already paid for everything, so I'm like, I kind of need to go. We've been
and
going.
it,
We've been going for about an hour, and I want to talk about Cali wrestling. I want to talk about some shirt stuff. So, do we want to record this stuff, or do we want to say our final piece
dude.
and move on?
Do you ever edit these down? Because I
Oh
bet we
yeah,
could go
yeah.
for
I edited them.
that. Yeah, because, dude, you know what else that we didn't talk about is like beat the streets. Like
That just
we
means
have
I have to get you on again.
we haven't talked
That's what.
about like, dude, we could talk about all kinds of stuff, man. I mean, Rob Cole, like the
Yeah.
ins and outs of Rob Cole. Like I've been very lucky the last dude, I've been lucky for a long time, but I've been very lucky in the people I've gotten to know in wrestling. And in the last handful of years, like it's been unbelievable. The guys coming into Stanford, like I'm getting calls.
Yeah.
Like when Cole came in, he called me and was like, "Hey, I'm coming into Stanford." And I'm like, "What the hell? Like, why is this dude calling me?" And it tripped me out, and it was interesting. And then, you know, Ayers and these guys, the next level good, like Lori
I
and
love I
Chris
love Chris
Ayers.
Ayers, man. He's you talked about like what's your list of guys you'd want to have on. Chris Ayers was number one. So when I saw him at World Challenge, I just was like, I had to talk to him to get him on, dude. That guy's awesome. He's the man.
Dude, Chris is unbelievable. But if you get a chance, you know who you should do one with is Lori and talk about women's wrestling. She's one of
Yeah.
the founders of D1's women's wrestling. Stanford just got their club up. Melissa Lee, who made a world team for us,
Hmm.
was one of the two Stanford women that founded the club. Um, and Melissa had thrown her name. Melissa and Nicole, her sister, both wrestled for us and both went to Stanford. Nicole's now graduated. Melissa's in her senior year, and they they had both thrown their names in the hat to start a club there when the Save Stanford wrestling stuff was happening, and Borelli and Blake and those guys were trying to save the program, and it just never got done, man. And
Yeah.
when Lori came in, I was like, "Hey, are you planning on working on this?" And she's like, "Yeah, I already have this. What's the girl's name? Hannah Riccoli." But I think she was doing like a semester abroad. I'm all, "Hey, I can put you in touch with Melissa." And dude, Lori just gets stuff done. I was out at the NWCA coaches convention this last summer with Beat the Streets, sent a group out, and I represented Bay Area there. And she spoke at like they had a like night of honoring women's wrestling, and she's just so impressive and so well put together, and just such a great advocate for women's wrestling and the sport in general. It's like they're really such a dynamic duo, and they have this like down to earth kind of like what is it, like salt of the earth thing going for them, but
Yeah.
also they're very very well polished and can handle these like really, like, affluent elite schools, which like, I mean, I've lived 15 minutes from Stanford's campus pretty much my whole life. And as much as I love going on campus, it's never like overly comfortable for me. Like it
Yeah,
feels
I
like
get
an
that.
elitist institution. And
It feels
those
like a
guys,
different
man,
world.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And those
Yeah.
guys seem to like be able to handle that, but also be authentic to who they are and be able to, interact with a guy like me. Like they're just really impressive people. And it's not a sales pitch with them. It's just who they are. So
Yeah.
I I've been very, very excited about working with them and doing stuff with them locally. So it's been cool. And I thought Rob Cole did some good stuff. Um, you know, it was unfortunate that he didn't ever really seem happy in the area, right?
Yeah.
Like um I think you talked to Grant, who was on the staff, and I think when the surprise of that UNC job opened up, like I think everybody around here kind of knew Cole was gone. Like as soon as the job opened, and it was crazy. I was at West Coast camp and I had just talked to Coleman. So, and Coleman gave no indication that he would ever leave UNC. Like
Yeah.
the stuff he told me about UNC, the neighborhood he was living in, his kids, the interactions, the social dynamics, social setup. I mean, it makes me really curious of what OSU gave him, right? Like that must have been one
Keys to the
hell of a
kingdom.
sweet deal, right?
Kings to the
Yeah.
kingdom. You know what I mean?
I mean,
Like, why else would you go? I mean, there's other stuff like he met his wife there. Like, I think she's from there. Like they have these roots there. He won an Olympic bronze medal, with their club, and it's like he's going back for that. But I also think they made some moves because who's the best fit that has an outside perspective that's going to help Oklahoma State jump levels. And I think when you look at some of these programs, when you just have the same people, just alum, that they don't go out anywhere, they're just like, you know what I mean? Like they graduate and then they stick around, they continue to coach. There's no fresh perspective. Coleman Scott went out to UNC and coached with an Iowa guy, for a good while. They recruited guys from all over the country, have proof of concept. They have a national champ with Austin O'Connor, a couple other All-Americans like Lachlan McNeil. And then it's like, hey, we can do this here. But now he goes back to Oklahoma State and they're better. They're better because of it, at least from an outside perspective.
Yeah, every time I've been able to interact with him, man, I've always been unbelievably impressed. But I was shocked when I saw that. I was like, I mean, and obviously the keys to the kingdom thing makes a lot of sense, right? They must have offered him that. But I was shocked that he left after getting to hang out with them a little over the summer. I was like, wow, that's crazy. But as soon as
Yeah.
I heard that, I was like, okay, Cole's gone. We're screwed at Stanford again. What are we going to do? And then when
Chris
Harris got
Harris.
announced, I was like, oh, this is unbelievable.
It's
And then,
perfect.
I didn't know Chris as well as I knew of Lori, right? I know who he was, but I'd seen Lori's work a bunch. And then once I actually got to meet him and got to talk to him, I'm like, wow, these guys are the type of character people that are going to benefit not just Stanford but the whole Bay Area wrestling community, which is always something sits in the back of my mind, right? Like I do my best to provide opportunities in my city, but I'd love to expand that out to our whole greater area because the more of a culture you have in an area, the easier it is to get those quality competitions to build everybody up, right? Like
Yeah.
it's more, I mean, for lack of a better like reason, it's more cost effective. I don't have to travel. Clovis doesn't have to travel, right? Like there's so much depth of wrestling in Clovis area that they don't need to travel to find good competition,
Mhm.
right? And that's not. I mean, there's some great coaches there. That's not based on the coaching. That's based on the school system, the way the school system's built, and the way they value athletics as a whole, and not even just athletics, but co-curricular activities, anything participatory beyond the compulsory school day that school district values. And we need to expand upon that, right? Like as a country, we need to expand upon that
Mhm.
because we keep focusing on STEM and like content standards and this and that and the other. And they talk about closing the achievement gap. I'll tell you how to close the achievement gap. Get kids to want to go to school. And you don't get
Make
kids
it
to want,
competitive,
yeah,
make it competitive to a sense.
but competition only works if you want to be there. And so what Clovis Unified has done is created from elementary school on up free opportunities to be in participatory programming that's built very similar to the high school system at all levels, whether it be, I mean, those guys win everything. That district wins everything. Like I talked to our band teacher at one point. I was like, yo, who wins state band titles? It's like, well, Buchanan, Clovis. I'm like, oh, who wins? You start looking at stuff and you're like, that district pops up at the state level in almost everything.
Yeah.
4-H, right? It's like insane. And then you go to Clovis High School and they're like framing buildings and they have some of the best career technical education I've ever seen. And it's like, it's just well done. It's an unbelievably well done system. Like I tried to replicate it here just with wrestling. And you know what the biggest impediment was? Zoning, school zoning. Because in Clovis, if you go to these 7 elementary schools, you're going to go to this middle school and you're going to go to this high school. So you can build a community, right? Because all those kids are going to follow each other. And I'm sure there's some negatives to that. But for our work, what we do, like I tried to build an elementary school league and I succeeded, right? I built the league, but it went into 2 different middle schools who split into 2 different high schools. That, like, dude, we had this kid that was a 2-time county champ. The school district moved him to the middle school that we had our better program at, and then it's 2 different districts. So when he got into the high school, they wouldn't give him the transfer to get to us, so he had to go to the other high school. And the coach there wasn't necessarily as serious as we were, and he just kind of ended up not even wrestling in high school. And it was like the effort we had put in to build the system to build up kids like that, and then to have them just have it all wash away, that's what causes people like us to stop doing the work we do.
Yeah.
And they don't have to deal with that in Clovis because the system's really well designed.
Yeah, I mean, there's things like you have to like actually get an apartment and like have the address be in the right place if you want to move schools. Like you have to and they do like investigations from what I've heard. Like it's not like, oh, we have an address. It's like, no, you better make sure you have a place. Like it has to be on record that you're there and like consistently and like you actually are renting out a place or whatever. Like it's a legitimate thing from what I've seen.
Yeah, but no, they do that. They do that here. It's the same here, right? We're a property tax district, right?
Yeah.
So every kid that they bust on residency that they throw out of the district because they don't live in the zone, they don't lose any money for, right? So they have the same amount of money and they don't have to serve that kid. So they spend a good amount of money in our district checking residency, hiring investigators to do that work. So I mean, and I don't know if they do that down there or not, but what I'm saying is we have to fight zoning because the zoning rules are crazy. There's a middle school that feeds our high school. It's Lawson Middle School in Cupertino. Some of those kids feed our high school. They also feed Homestead High School, Lynbrook High School, and Cupertino High School. How are you going to create a culture there that expands beyond their school, right? Like creating that culture is unbelievably difficult, right? And if you can start it at the elementary school level, dude, you skip over all kinds of nonsense, right? Like it's a really cool thing to be able to have elementary school in school wrestling, right? Because we did it here. And one of the schools fed the other middle school, which was fine, except they split. So now you've got all these weird decisions and weird, are you going to move? And where does your house fall? There's an apartment complex in our city that the zoning line goes down the middle of. Part of the apartment complex goes to one high school, part goes to another. Like that's insane. Like that's insane. And it makes it unbelievably difficult to create really comprehensive youth development programs, whether it be wrestling or anything else. And what I've seen and what I've heard, and I've never worked in Clovis Unified, but that's one of the most unbelievable things I've seen about that district is they really set the whole thing up as 5 little districts. And you have your high school, your middle school, and whatever it is, 7 elementary schools. And so if you bought a house there, the kids that you're dealing with growing up are going to stay together. So
Yeah.
say you're a dad who played college baseball and you decide you're going to coach a little league team and they all come out of those 7 schools, they're going to end up all playing together at the high school level.
Yeah.
Right? Like
That's
that
why
that it,
these groups are so elite. It's like they've been around each other for so long.
well, and the depth of those programs is,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, great coaching, of course,
Great coaching. Yeah.
but like there's a lot of great coaching throughout the state that isn't able to do what they do, and it's because of the system that's built there, and no
For
one's
sure.
looking at it. Like, I mean, we're talking about it on a wrestling podcast, man. Someone needs to be talking about it in an educational administration podcast, right? And there's other pieces
Just
to it
wait,
too.
I think
But
in 15 years I'll get my admin credential and, maybe I'll go be an admin. Maybe we'll get things done. You should be an
yeah, I mean,
admin.
nah, I swear too much.
We bleep you out. Well, hey man,
Yeah,
it's getting close. It's getting close to that time and I gotta go. I gotta go have dinner with the fiance. But
um,
dude, any
what
final
was
go ahead.
what what was the so caliwrestling.com
Yeah.
is where you can find your podcast now, and the goal of that website is going to be hopefully where you can find everything in wrestling. I was talking to Robbie Smith. I think we're going to put Cali Connect on there as well, so there'll be a couple podcasts on there. But um if for you, if you've got resources or stuff you're looking for and you want, you think parents should have access to, or you think, like, let me know and I'll link stuff in. Really what I want to do with that website is make it a like one-stop shop for kind of anybody who's any parent, any coach, any, have it sectioned out. So whatever you're looking for, you can find on there. Obviously I've linked through the forum and some other stuff, but
Would
Tech
it be
Falls.
possible to do like some kind of blog, like not the forum, but like a blog, like because I think honestly parent information is so important. Not just because again to just help the kid, obviously it's to help the kids, but if something goes wrong, it's like, well, I didn't know. It's like, well, you have access to this information, and hopefully bringing some level of accountability to other people and other coaches as well. Would that be something that we could possibly do as well?
Due to blogs, I'm starting to put together online courses, right?
Okay.
In it. So like I'm gonna do the first one's like $5 online course. Everything you need to know about track wrestling to be a high school wrestling coach. How do you print your weigh-in sheets? How do you put in your lineups? How do you add seating information? How do you use the free dual meet program? What's the statistics program? What can it do for $50? All those kind of little things. So I haven't quite finished it, but it's close. It's already on there.
Yeah.
Um, and then, yeah, we could do blogs. We could do like pretty much if you can think of it, I can figure out how to do it. So, and then, someday maybe I'll do um, some ad space stuff, like if people want to market things. But
Yeah.
if I do that with this website, I'm going to do it myself and not do like with that wrestling.life site. I did the Google ads thing and
Mhm.
it's annoying and it doesn't provide any real revenue, right? It's like pennies on the dollar, and I just put it into the club. But yeah, hopefully, we can create a space where like all of the like these disparate pieces of California wrestling on the web can be found in one place. I think when the California Wrestler went down, lots of people popped up to try to replace it. And the idea behind Cali Wrestling was linked to all those places. So
Hmm.
there's still just one place, but you can access everybody's stuff. I think there's a CaliforniaWrestling.com. Obviously, there's Cal Grappler. The
Yeah.
forums back up. Like, there's a
There's
lot of stuff out there.
Cali culture, like my buddy does one of that one. Like, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's out there, but I think having a website where I don't have to go and try to find everything because there's so many different, stuff to look at. If we can just go on one website and have access to everything and even maybe discover other stuff. Like I haven't listened to Robbie Smith's podcast, um, but I've seen him do it at state events. So yeah, but and he'd be maybe a fun guy to have on too, talk about some Greco. But anyways, man, I gotta go. But it's always I always love talking to you. Even when we're not recording, I love talking to you. But
It's always fun.
appreciate you having you on, man.
Yeah, and hit me up. We'll get you some shirts printed in the print shop too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
Let's go.
sure. All right, man. Hey, thank you for having me on. Hopefully you edit this down a bunch.
I'll try to take
um,
out all the crazy stuff.
but yeah, man, I think we were kind of all over the place, but hopefully there was some tidbits that make people think a little bit, and whether they agree or disagree. It's oh, you know what I did on the when I embedded your stuff into Cali Wrestling is I had left on comments. So there's
There you
like a
go.
comment board below it. So maybe some people can tell me how wrong I am about most of my ideas.
All right. All
I'm
right.
always willing to learn. I'm always willing to learn. So yeah, man. Thank you. Have a good night. Enjoy your dinner with your fiance.
I will.
All
Later,
right, man.
Daniel.
Later, Brian.
Thank you.